Social unrest, a raging pandemic, economic uncertainty. The stakes feel higher in the 2020 president, but have the power to flip the House red or turn the Senate blue. And Texans will have a big say in what happens.
I'm John Cornyn.
I'm MJ Hegar.
Texas is one of 34 states where voters will elect senators this November. And while analysts say the seat leans red, Democrats aren't going down without a fight. By now, you've seen the ads, read the attacks, and are likely tired of all the noise.
That's why we wanted to do something different. We set out to bring you interviews with the candidates that reveal more about who they are as people, what drives them, as well as discuss their policy ideas. MJ Hegar agreed to participate. Senator John Cornyn's team initially expressed interest, but then stopped responding to us. But our Vote Texas mission to bring our viewers information so they can make the best decisions for them didn't stop. So we decided to move forward with this special.
Tonight, you'll learn more about the candidates and their visions to improve the lives of Texans so you can vote Texas. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Ashley Goodo. The November election is right around the corner, and your voice, your vote, matters more than ever. Yes, the presidential election is very important, but so are the other races on the ballot, especially the U.S. Senate, where there is a tug of war for power. It takes 51 seats to have a majority in the Senate. Political analysts at Real Clear Politics have the Senate evenly divided right now, 46 up with 8 toss-up districts. Now, Texas isn't one of the 8. It's expected to remain red, but one woman is trying to change that.
This is a story about doors.
In 2018, a Round Rock woman burst onto the political scene with a viral campaign ad.
And that's me, MJ Hegar, an Air Force combat veteran and a mom.
Her fight to represent District 31 in the U.S. House of Representatives caught the attention of voters and the nation. But it wasn't enough. While MJ Hegar came close, she lost to Republican John Carter. Fast forward 2 years.
Allow me to reintroduce myself.
And she's back, this time fighting for a seat in the U.S. Senate.
As somebody who has flown, water missions to suppress wildfires, it's kind of in my nature to find the biggest bucket of water I can find and put out the biggest fire that I can find. I believe that I'm in a position to unseat John Cornyn.
The road to November wasn't easy. Hegar had to beat out a crowded field of Democrats in the primary, followed by a runoff against State Senator Royce West. But she's made it to this moment to face off against Senator John Cornyn.
Thank you so much for taking time to chat with us today. We appreciate it. We want to start by getting to know you a little better. So putting politics aside, I want you to tell us what motivates you.
My kids, for sure. I grew up in a family early on. We're survivors of domestic violence, and as a very young child, it instilled an idea in me that I wanted to grow up and be able to protect the people that I loved, because when I was really little, I didn't feel like I could do that. And so both joining the military, becoming a rescue pilot, now running for office, it's just an extension of the way I'm trying to protect not only my boys, but the state that I love so much, the country that I love so much.
I think people in Texas are pretty familiar with your military background, at this point, and the hardships that you had to overcome. Your resiliency has really stood out. But outside of that experience, thinking outside of your military background, what is the hardest thing you've had to overcome?
I would say the scariest thing I've ever done, people would probably say, jumping out of airplanes or being shot. It was having kids, and not the childbirth, although I did have very complicated pregnancies, and I know the value of keeping politicians and government out of the relationship between a woman and her doctor. When I was pregnant with my first, I was getting laid off from my healthcare job, and so really worried about where we were going to get our healthcare. But I would say just the act of being a parent was the scariest thing and the most rewarding.
People are motivated or inspired to get into politics for a lot of different reasons. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that journey for you and what led you to get into this game.
I took time off of my healthcare job and went to DC as a private citizen. And long story short, my experience there was I was successful in building a broad bipartisan coalition of support, but the dysfunction and the corruption and it just, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I would argue that the way our government is working or is not working right now is a domestic threat to our Constitution. And I was really kind of disgusted by the impact of, the very uber wealthy special interests and the dysfunction and the hyperpartisanship and the lack of servant leadership and centering people's focus on the mission and fighting for regular, hardworking Texans like me and my family. And so, I'm not the kind of person who can see a problem and just will complain about it. I'll usually take action to fix it. And so if I'm going to complain about it, I have to do something to try to fix it.
I'm Terry Gruca. Incumbent Senator John Cornyn talked to reporters after he cast his ballot in Austin. Here's what he had to say when asked why Texans should re-elect him to the U.S. Senate.
One of the benefits of experience is I know how the Senate works. I know how to get things done. I've been proud to have been recognized by nonpartisan organizations as one of the most effective members of the Senate. When Texas experiences natural disasters like Hurricane Harvey, I led the Texas delegation to get $30 billion of relief from the federal government for the state of Texas. But I've also done other things that, frankly, are hard to do. Things like pass common sense background check improvements for gun sales, the Fix NICS bill after Sutherland Springs, working with Chris Murphy, one of the most liberal members of the Congress, who is very different from me on the Second Amendment, but doing things that I believe will save lives. And then addressing things like the rape kit backlog, dealing with anti-human trafficking laws. I'm proud of the work that I've been able to do working with the Texas delegation.
You'll hear more from both candidates when Vote Texas, Battle for the U.S. Senate, returns.
Get ready. Special Vote Texas, the race for the U.S. Senate, Cornyn versus Hegar. We took some time getting to know U.S. Senate candidate MJ Hegar, but what's her vision for the future of Texas and how will she make it happen? Our conversation continues.
You know, you mentioned that you voted for Senator John Cornyn, a Republican. Some Democrats would frown upon that.
Sure.
What do you say to those Democrats who say this makes you not a true Democrat if you were voting for a Republican?
I think an 18 years ago vote, if somebody is going to put a litmus test like that on it, then we're not going to change our record over the last couple decades here in Texas. That you know, instead of instead of looking at what somebody did 20 years ago, we really need to talk about, this includes John Cornyn, instead of looking at his promises from 20 years ago, we should be looking at what people are doing now and what people are fighting for now. And my values haven't changed. I've always, fought for marginalized communities, fought for equal rights, fought for access to healthcare. I worked in healthcare for 5 years and saw how damaging the current healthcare system is to Texas. I'm fighting for women's reproductive rights. I'm fighting for all sorts of choice in our healthcare. People should be able to choose a public option into Medicare. Women should be able to choose what to do with our bodies. I'm a gun owner, and I want to protect our Second Amendment rights. But I am, like many responsible gun owners in Texas, a strong advocate for gun safety legislation, common sense gun safety legislation, to protect my boys and to send them to school without having to buy them bulletproof backpacks, but also because the gun violence epidemic is the greatest threat to our Second Amendment rights. And so, the vast majority of Texans want universal background checks, but John Cornyn won't vote for them because he takes so much money from the gun lobby. So, I don't know. If people talk to me for 5 minutes, I think that they understand that I don't make decisions based on partisanship, but the things that I am fighting for are all the things that are reasons why we need to get rid of John Cornyn.
If you are elected to the U.S. Senate, what would be your top legislative priority for 2021?
I think that's got to be healthcare reform because that's what's hurting Texans the most. I don't think we can get the action that we need on the very important things like healthcare reform, immigration reform, getting our economy back up and working with jobs for regular people like us, gun safety, climate change, all of the really important things that we need to tackle until we do something about the influence of the corporate PAC money and the corruption in DC. So definitely doing something to get our government functioning again, back up and running for regular people like us is my top priority, but my top legislative priority will be healthcare reform because right now we have 1 out of 3 adults that don't have access to health insurance. And as someone who worked in healthcare for 5 years, I can tell you that the lack of access to health insurance, even if you have insurance and you feel like things are okay for you and your family, first of all, with record unemployment, I hope things continue to be good for you and your family because people are losing their jobs left and right now. But even if you feel like you like your plan, that's great. I'm going to fight for you to be able to keep your plan. But at the same time, the costs that you're paying when you walk into an emergency room and you pay $50 for a tablet of ibuprofen. I have declined ibuprofen in the emergency room before because I knew what it would show up on my bill. And the reason that tablet of ibuprofen is $50 is because we're also paying for how many people come in and receive their care without access to preventative care, receive their care in the most expensive environment in trauma care and urgent care and ERs for things that could have been prevented. So not only are we talking about life and death for people, but we're also talking about costs. The current system doesn't benefit anyone but the insurance agencies. And so we're closing healthcare facilities in rural Texas where you already sometimes have to drive somebody an hour in your pickup truck who's having a heart attack to get actual help. We've got a healthcare crisis here in Texas, and so healthcare reform is certainly going to be my top issue.
Give us some final thoughts about why you think people should elect you this November.
I think when we have an opportunity as voters to elect one of us instead of one of them, we got to take it. We got to take it. I am so tired of these career politicians with stars in their eyes for majority leader power who won't vote for things like term limits, things that would limit their powers, things that I've been advocating for. When we have an opportunity to elect someone who has worked minimum wage jobs, been laid off, worried about whether or not Social Security is going to be there for her and her family, John Cornyn right now is taking 3 taxpayer-funded pensions. He's not worried about whether or not Social Security is going to be there for him in his retirement. And he's got a 4th coming to him in November when I retire him. So we need to elect servant leaders with a history of taking on tough battles with the right type of experience, not experience of being in DC for 18 years. John Cornyn says we need a steady hand on the wheel right now. Not if that person's driving us off a cliff. We need someone who knows when to turn the wheel. And so if we can have an opportunity to elect someone who has a proven history of being able to take on tough challenges, who has Texas values like grit and backbone and integrity and servant leadership, then we can actually get our government up and running for regular Texans again, and we have to take that opportunity.
program, we made several efforts to get an interview with Senator John Cornyn. His team initially seemed interested, then stopped responding to us. But Senator Cornyn has been a public servant and on the Texas political scene for decades, so we can still share some things about him with you.
And I'm eager to roll up my sleeves with all of our colleagues and get to work.
Since 2002, John Cornyn has been working on behalf of the people of Texas in the U.S. Senate, but his time as a public servant started long before that. Back in 1984, at the age of 32, the young attorney won a state district judge seat in Bexar County. 6 years later, he was elected to the Texas Supreme Court, where he served until 1997, the year he ran for Texas Attorney General and won. Cornyn served as the state's top attorney until winning a seat in the U.S. Senate in 2002. Voters have reelected him twice, and the Republican says his work is not done yet.
What we need is more problem solvers, people who, regardless of political party, are looking to find the common ground and make progress. And that's something I'm privileged to have a chance to do as your senator.
But winning a fourth term won't happen easily. Democrats have found a candidate in MJ Hegar who they believe could unseat Cornyn, making this race one Texas and the nation is watching. Tensions have grown between Senator Cornyn and MJ Hegar. In September, the veteran challenged the senator to participate in 3 debates, including one hosted by our parent company, Tegna. Senator Cornyn only agreed to 1 debate. KVUE's Luis De Leon shows us the policy positions he took during that face-off.
The debate back in early October consisted of timely issues, much of which having to do with how to handle COVID-19 in Texas, including whether or not each candidate would vote for more stimulus checks for Texans. Senator John Cornyn saying,
I've actually done something about it by supporting this bipartisan $3.8 trillion expenditure.
but when it comes to putting businesses under more restrictions,
So I don't believe that we need any lockdowns. It's done tremendous damage to individuals and to the economy. And we need this economy to be there so it can come back once we put the virus in the rearview mirror.
and he also does not see a need for a national mask mandate.
Because I think the United States is a big, diverse place. Texas is a big, diverse place. Obviously, out in West Texas, people know how to socially distance. They do it every day.
And when it comes to sending kids to schools during the pandemic, Senator Cornyn said,
I support kids going to school when they can safely do so in consultation with their parents, because one of the biggest problems is poor children who don't have access to broadband or the internet are falling farther and farther behind, and that's a human tragedy.
And of course, the topic on everyone's mind, a vaccine for the virus. When Senator Cornyn was asked if he'd get a vaccine, he responded in part,
I'll eventually get it, but not first in line.
Switching gears, Senator Cornyn was part of the Judiciary Committee handling the hearing of Judge Amy Coney Barrett's nomination for Supreme Court Justice. When asked about whether or not he supports term limits for the highest court of the land,
At the federal level, it's a different model. The lifetime tenure is supposed to be removed from politics, not making policy decisions. So I think that's something we should talk about, because unfortunately, too many people now see judges as making policy from the bench.
moving on to law enforcement and the criminal justice system, Cornyn was also asked about qualified immunity for police officers.
I think they need to be held accountable when they cross the line, but I think some measure of qualified immunity where you think you're doing the right thing in good faith is appropriate.
And moving south, the debate also took a turn towards issues at the border. Senator Cornyn was asked about the Remain in Mexico policy and whether he supports it or not.
Keeping people out of the country during this crisis is a public health measure that we should support. But it's important to know that, other things come across the border other than asylum seekers, drugs, human trafficking.
And in the issue of climate change, Cornyn agrees that humans affect the climate, but is against a carbon tax.
That will destroy the jobs of hundreds of thousands of workers out in West Texas and around the nation.
And one emphasized point by Cornyn was keeping Texas, Texas.
I don't believe we need to make Texas like Chuck Schumer's New York or Nancy Pelosi's California.
You'll hear more from Senator Cornyn after this.
Welcome back. Earlier this month, Senator John Cornyn spoke with a reporter from our sister station in Houston about issues surrounding the election, from the president's response to COVID-19 to the possibility of Texas turning blue. Here's some of what he said. Speaking virtually with KVUE reporter Grace White, Senator John Cornyn discussed whether President Donald Trump's response to the coronavirus pandemic has hurt the Republican Party.
Well, this is clearly unprecedented. You're not the first person who's asked me that question, and I'm sure that looking back on it, we will figure out things we could have done better. But part of the problem is the virus doesn't play by the same rules that we do. It doesn't follow our rule book. I remember, for example, before April, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, said masks were useless. And then in April, they said they're essential. And I believe that today, and that's why I wear my mask when I can't socially distance. And we've all learned how to adapt that way.
As Texans head to the polls this fall, there is a looming question that makes Democrats hopeful and Republicans cringe. Could the Lone Star State turn blue? Senator Cornyn says that's really up to Republicans.
I do think there's a chance, but it would be primarily because people like me didn't do our job. And one of the things I think the O'Rourke-Cruz race showed is that we've gotten a little complacent. I'm talking about Republicans. And we hadn't been attentive to voter registration. The fact a lot of new people have moved to Texas. A lot of younger people have come of age and are now voting. And we haven't done the organization that our Democratic friends have been doing for a number of years. They've been sort of chipping away every election and then came within 3 points of Senator Cruz. But we're going to have a huge turnout, about 11 million people voting. And this will be, of course, in the midst of a pandemic. It's an unprecedented time. So we're trying to do everything we know how to do. That's all you can do is try to control what you can. The rest of it, you just have to hope for the best.
For Senator Cornyn, that means hoping Texas voters will check his name at the polls. And to him, a vote for Cornyn?
I believe it means the sort of policies that have made Texas the envy of the nation when it comes to job creation, in particular, good energy jobs. My opponent doesn't believe in the energy policies that have produced the greatest renaissance in natural gas and oil in our lifetime. And that's, of course, hired hundreds of thousands of Texas energy workers. She's not for any of that. She also believes in defunding the police rather than defending the police. That would be a big difference between us. She's compared the border security officials who work along the border trying to protect our country from human traffickers and illegal drugs. She's compared them to human rights abusers in China who are the atrocities they're committing against the Uyghurs. So I think there's a pretty stark choice here. One of the conundrums that I think MJ has found herself in is that if she wants to raise the kind of money she needs to raise from national sources, places outside of Texas, she's got to talk a party line at the national level that really puts her out of touch with the people in our state. And I know seniors don't want to see Medicare destroyed. She would extend that to people who haven't paid any money into it, and even to illegal immigrants. And she is willing to deny you the benefit of your employer-provided insurance coverage. I think as people learn a little bit more about the differences on policy, the choice is going to be very clear.
Choice expressed through your vote is your power. And we hope you now feel empowered to voice your opinion at the polls. Don't forget, the last day to cast your ballot early is October 30th, and Election Day is November 3rd. Vote, Texas.